I'm Evan with Hemmings, the world's largest collector car market. We're at West Tech Performance today to dyno a Pontiac Ram Air V. Pontiac's Ram Air V V8 is one of the rarest muscle car engines ever made because it was never actually sold to the public. The story of the head starts in the 1960s when John DeLorean was a sponsored Ford racer. And he noticed that one of the other cars on a test and tune day was going pretty fast and it had a set of unusual Ford heads on it that he'd never seen before. Turns out they were early Ford tunnel port heads that ran the push-rod through the intake port, which at the time was pretty unheard of. George borrowed those heads, got them over to the Pontiac Motor Division, and brother John, the John DeLorean, was actually instrumental in getting these heads adapted to fit Pontiac's architecture. The heads flowed extremely well, over 300 CFM, which was a crazy number for 1960s, but due to some internal changes, John DeLorean getting moved from Pontiac to Chevrolet, support for Pontiac Motorsports fell off and the heads never ended up on a production car. Our heads were produced by a company called DCI Motorsports in Atwater, Ohio, and they are copies of an original Ram Air V, but they do feature some modern upgrades such as raised intake runners and a few other things to help them flow way more than the factory heads ever could. So what we have on the dyno today is a 461 cubic inch Ram Air headed Pontiac. It started life as a 400 cubic inch Pontiac V8. It was in my 1970 GTO, and I wanted to do something really unique, really cool, and make a bunch of power. The engine has 11.3 to 1 compression, a 246, 262 at 50 thou camshaft that has 0.780 lift on the intake, and a little bit less than that on the exhaust. And that's a pretty gnarly camshaft, but one of the things that we should point out with a Ram Air V is Pontiac actually switched the ports up, which means that you'd be opening an exhaust valve when you actually meant to be opening an intake. So a big thank you to Chris Potter at Comp Cams for making us a heck of a custom camshaft. As far as the bottom end, the engine displaces 461 cubic inches. It has a 4250 stroke SCAT crankshaft, SCAT 6800 connecting rods, and a 4155 bore with SRP pistons. Because of the unique Ram Air V cylinder head, the engine had a pretty custom induction setup. AccuFab helped me do fuel rails and injectors with custom hold downs. And then the intake itself is a DCI Motorsports piece with a custom plenum that holds 2 Holley 4150 throttle bodies. And then a Dominator ECU is gonna run the port injection throughout the pulls today. The first steps are gonna be to run the engine through a break-in cycle, make sure everything's good, that we've got good oil pressure. Then we're gonna start making some power pulls. We're gonna adjust the air-fuel mixture for every change that we make. And then we're gonna go ahead and dial in ignition timing to where the engine produces its best power. Once we've done that, I've got a little homebrew plenum spacer. We're gonna see what changing the plenum volume on top of the intake manifold does for us. And then if we have time today, we're gonna try to adjust the camshaft timing, maybe retard it a little bit and see if that helps us pick up some additional power on top. But I'm excited, I'm hopeful for big numbers, and we're ready to get dynoing. All right, well, it is go time. The engine has been run through a break-in cycle. Eric's got it all queued up on the dyno, and we are about ready to make a power pull, and I'm really excited to know what this thing makes, so let's do it. .649 horsepower and 565.4 pound-feet of torque. That is not bad for run number 1. What are your thoughts, Eric? You've seen so many engines and seen so many power curves. Like, what jumps out at you here?
I love how this, basically it's 500 pound-foot on the walk-in, picks up to the 565. Doesn't even go under 500. Torque's not falling off the planet. This is carrying really, really well.
So 3,000 RPM, I mean, like, as you're letting the clutch out, you're hitting that RPM so quickly. There's 500 pound-feet on the table all the time. This is gonna be a really fun driver, but this is dyno 1. We've got a few things we wanna change and try, so I think we're gonna go out there, put a plenum spacer on and see what that does to our numbers. I was really hoping for 700. I'm not gonna complain about 650, but I think there's a little bit more left in this thing.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's see what we can find.
All All right, we have one pull done, and now we have the plenum off of the engine, which is a really cool chance to look down the port and see just what makes a Ram Air 5 so unique. This is the DCI intake that matches the DCI Ram Air heads. The runners in this manifold are so big you could practically roll a golf ball down them, but you can see in the center there's actually a tube that's cast in place, and that's what the pushrod runs through. That's what makes this head so unique. So the reason we're looking at a plenum spacer as an option to increase the power of this engine is not because of the height. What is really going on here is the intake doesn't close until the cylinder is already past bottom dead center. So that piston is coming up in the hole and the intake valve is still open. At low RPM, that creates reversion where some of that intake fuel charge gets pushed back into the intake. But what's really happening is that high pressure wave is flowing backward and then bouncing back into the chamber. Adjusting the plenum volume helps us to time when that wave hits the open intake valve. So if we can play with plenum volume and have that wave hit the valve at the perfect time, we might actually be able to overfill the cylinder and make a little bit more horsepower per cubic inch than this engine would do otherwise. All right, we've added a plenum spacer to the motor. That's our first change for the day, so it's time to dyno it and see if that was worth anything at all. So 656 to 649, that's 7 horsepower. Is that degree of accuracy for the dyno, or are we onto something?
It overlays really well here. I mean, this could be temperature stuff here, but by here I think it's all the same.
It's consistent enough that it makes me think it's not an error, that it's actually doing something.
It's actually doing something.
Okay, cool. Hey, we found 7 free horsepower. I will take that. We're gonna go check valve lash right now and see what else is left on the table. All right, I just got finished lashing the valves. This was the first time the engine really had heat in it. Things are wearing in, so the valves were a little bit loose. Tightened everything up. That should make the cam act a little bit larger, which is gonna help us on the top end. But before we put the valve cover back on, this is actually really cool. This is an LS rocker from Comp Cams, and they pressed a Pontiac trunnion in it. So our 10600 pushrod is also from Comp. So we've got almost an inch of lift going on inside of this head in a really unconventional setup, but it's proven to work really well at high RPM. And now with the tightened up lash, we're gonna see what kind of power that makes. All right, so now that we've lashed the valves, we're gonna make another pull, see if tightening everything up and getting it right where the cam card said makes a difference in the top end power. I think it will. This head is really tall. It's aluminum. The factory head was iron, which means that it's gonna grow more as it gets hot. So pulling the lash back down, getting everything tighter is, I think, gonna actually net us a good chunk here. That was a significant jump. 656 to 675 just by getting the valve lash set. You know, when you have all that extra lash going on, it's gonna make the camshaft act smaller because the lobe is not opening the rocker when it ideally should be. So now that we've got it broken in and everything's kind of coming into its own, setting that lash, 675 horsepower, I think there's a little bit left in this. So I think we're gonna swing the cam back. All right, Troy and I pulled the front off the motor. We swung the cam back 4 degrees, and now we're gonna make our last dyno of the day and hope that that gets us a really, really impressive number. We just made 675. I am beyond happy with that, but I like to get to the dyno, make every change that I possibly can. Sometimes they push us forward, sometimes they pull us back, but we learn something every time. We've done everything we can possibly do, and now we're gonna see what it does for the last and final dyno of the day.
I figured it would do this.
Yeah, exactly. I thought we'd pull a little out of the bottom, find a little bit more up top, but it's not. All right, sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. Yeah. So we swung the cam 4 degrees. It did not pick up power. It was happy where it was. Well, we're ending our day on the dyno at 675 horsepower. I am ecstatic. I cannot wait to put this engine into my 1970 GTO. And I just love that it's still a Pontiac. It's unique, that it's something that, you're gonna pop the hood at a car show and no one's ever seen a Ram Air V. That's partly because the original heads are absolutely unobtainium. They're incredibly expensive, if you can even find a set. DCI Motorsports, their clone castings allowed us to build a real tunnel port Ram Air V Pontiac, make a bunch of horsepower, and I cannot wait to see how this drives on the street.